just another maybe a minute or two more as we let more folks in. But I've heard so much about you, and I've met you over the phone before as well. So we're all very grateful that you're here, and I'm excited to hear more about the work you've done with the Frederick Douglass history. So this is amazing.
So you give me a cue when you're ready to start?
Yes, indeed. I'm going to introduce you, and
Okay.
then I'm going to read from your bio, and then
Okay.
we'll go ahead and get started. So,
Gotcha.
and I want to welcome everyone this morning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Inspiration starts your Monday morning off right. Today we have Lou Fields, who will be joining us and sharing his story. And I'm going to talk a little bit about his bio. So, due to the laws in 1838, a 20-year-old Frederick Douglass fled slavery in his home state of Maryland, seeking freedom in the North. It would be over a quarter century before he could safely return to Maryland. Douglass rose from humble beginnings to become the most prominent African American of his time. Douglass stated, "My life has been distinguished by two important events, dated about 26 years apart. One was my running away from Maryland, and the other is my returning to Maryland." Douglass's life story is one of overcoming tremendous obstacles and challenges. He is one of Maryland's most inspiring heroes. Lou Fields is the host of BDX Live Talk Show, the leading founder and president of the Greater Baltimore Black Chamber of Commerce, and from 2005 to 2008, and the Black Dollar Exchange 2010. Lou serves as an advocate for the establishment of the Mayor's Commission on African American Tourism and Preservation. Lou is a member of Empowerment Temple AME Church. Since 1996, Lou and the council continue to serve as a nonprofit educational and tourism advocacy organization that has been active in the preservation of tourism community. The council's mission is to educate, research, preserve, protect, and promote Maryland's African American history and culture as a vital and beneficial product of Baltimore, Maryland tourism industry. The council provides services to communities, organizations, and public entities that need research assistance and information. The council's tourism division provides heritage tours across Maryland, including the popular Frederick Douglass Path to Freedom walking tour in historic Fells Point, Baltimore. His new book, Freedom Seekers, Early Abolitionist in Antebellum, Baltimore, includes a chapter on Frederick Douglass. And without further ado, welcome Mr. Lou Fields.
All right now. Good morning. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Ms. Diane, Ms. Gina, for arranging for our talk today. Unfortunately, it's a tough task. To talk about Frederick Douglass in 10 minutes is just nearly quite impossible. So what we're going to do is try to squeeze it in and leave some time for question and answers. For the most part today, my talk was centered on Douglass's first book, The Narrative of an American Slave, written by himself. And for this morning, first I'll just say I've been doing the Frederick Douglass walking tour in Fells Point for 21 years. And we've had hundreds and thousands of different people coming from all over the world into Baltimore to do tourism. In some type of way, they find my little tour. And so over the 21 years, we've had a chance to read and listen to a lot of Frederick Douglass's words and read his writings. And what I thought today would be a good theme would be to talk about Home Sweet Home, which with Douglass, we're going to look at the first 18 years of his life. And while we talk about Douglass's first 18 years, you look at what your home life was like from your earliest infant years until your childhood years, getting to elementary school and middle school and high school. The things that happened in your home during those 18 years are perhaps the most crucial learning experiences that you'll have. So my theme today is Home Sweet Home. And so we'll start by looking at Douglas's first 8 years at home on the Edward Lloyd plantation in the area of St. Michael's in Eastern Maryland. During those 8 years, Douglas writes about the hard scenes that as a child in his childhood home that he saw. And we know that things that happen in your home, particularly in your first 8 years, help create the person you will sooner or later become. Now, what Douglas saw, unfortunately, and he writes about this, he said his home was not filled with love and caring and nurturing and protection and things that fall under the umbrella of childhood education. Douglas writes he had none of those. His childhood home was filled with horror, dread, violence against men, women, and children, solely based on the color of their skin, which dictated the status of their life as a slave. Douglas goes on to write that he was sometimes almost starved to death. He talks about having no bed to sleep in, no shoes, no trousers, no shirt, no loving care. He never can write about as a child going to school, having education in a classroom setting, and then returning home. He never writes about being able to live with his mother, who he only saw 4 or 5 times in his entire life. He didn't know as a child who his father was. But what he did know was the hard scenes that he saw daily when enslaved persons were whipped, beaten, mutilated, just about every human right that you as a child had in your household for the first 18 years. Douglas had none of those things. What he had was a life of servitude, bondage, and severe whipping. And he had that in his first 18 years of life. Where is the love and home sweet home for a Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, who, as we know, becomes Frederick Douglass? And so when you read his narrative, he gives explicit details on some of the hard scenes, severe whippings that he saw happen to women, particularly women who were of the master's favor, who would not bow down and do exactly what their master said at all times. So Douglas' home sweet home really was the exact opposite. And he states that after he left the Eastern Shore Plantation and come to Baltimore, for 12 years, from 1826 to 1838, he lived in Baltimore. And in Baltimore, he too saw cruelty of slavery. He saw human beings being treated worse than animals. He himself was attacked on the Fells Point dock by 4 young men, white young men, and beat almost to an inch of his life. His left eye was almost knocked out of his socket. He was beaten so bad, in fact, his master went to the justice of the peace to file liability claims against the perpetrators, saying that they had damaged his property. In Baltimore, this was his home sweet home. In Baltimore, he was beginning to learn how to read and write through the mistress, Sophia Auld. The husband found that out, stopped it, and admonished the wife never to teach a slave to read, saying that he would be unfit for anything, particularly this one here, referring to their little Freddie. So Frederick Douglass' first 2 decades of life, there was no such thing as a home sweet home. Never had a bed to sleep in. In fact, he had to sleep in a cornmeal bag. That was his sleeping bag. And he had to sleep on the floor most of his life. Well, the story, thank God, does not end there. On September 3rd, which is 8 days ago, 1838, Frederick Douglass decided to claim his own freedom, to run away from his home, sweet home. Now think about that. A child comes up in his house, home is his most special place. But in Douglass, he saw fit that he needed to escape from his home to find freedom in the North. And in 1838, for the first time in his life, Frederick Douglass had a true home with his bride, Miss Anna Murrah Douglass, and their 5 children. Now, when we look back over those first 18 years of Douglass' life, you would think he would be very, very bitter, as we see in the case of innocent men who have been released from prison because the DNA now has proven them to be innocent. You would think those persons who served decades in prison unjustly would come out and be very bitter. But they're not. Most of the men who do that and get their freedom, they're so happy to be free. they do not hold the anger and the bitterness of what had happened in the first, in Douglas' case, 2 decades of his life. So his home sweet home doesn't get sweet until he takes his own freedom and moves to New Bedford, Massachusetts. And from there, his life takes on an unbelievable course to become a true inspirational a life story for those who are willing to read his books, read his writings, and see that although he started life as a slave, he ended life as a United States Marshal. He started life as someone else's property. He ended life as a property owner. And his legacy after he passed on February 20th, 1895, today is just quite unbelievable. Frederick Douglass is the only man in Maryland, and perhaps in the entire country, but I know in Maryland, he's the only man that has 5 statues. Think about that. 18 years of life without a real home, no bed to sleep in. But today, he has 5 statues in Maryland. In addition, he has 3 very well done museums in the state of Maryland in his honor. So September 3rd every year is a very special week right before the Labor Day holiday celebration. For those of us who are Douglassites, we always remember September 3rd as his day of freedom. And so this year, in his home county of Talbot County, Maryland, and in Easton, they unveiled a $50,000 mural for a man who was once a slave. The very next day or so, they opened the largest capital project in Washington, D.C.'s history. And this was a $442 million Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge. And so I think the metaphor and the storyline is, I say this a lot to the students on my tours. It's not where you start from. It's how you go on your journey and how you prepare yourself for your journey. And on 9/11, God bless those who died on 9/11 and the families who were affected by it. But on this past Saturday, 9/11, I had a tour bus of 38 young students, Black African-American males, age 6 to age 16. And for the theme of the tour, I used freedom plus education equals success. And so I asked the young folks, how do you describe your freedom? What do you think would give you the best route to having freedom in America today as a young African-American male? Which of course can be a very dangerous person to be because unfortunately America has not always embraced young African-American men. So what I told them, I said, if you want more freedom, you must get more education. If you want more freedom, you have to apply yourself and learn as much as God puts in front of you. Similar to Frederick Douglass. When Frederick Douglass realized that his master would not have him have the ability to learn to read or write, that became Douglass's all-out quest. Even before he had a quest for freedom and abolition, as an abolitionist, he wanted to learn the English language and to be able to write the English language and speak the English language. So I think the inspirational story behind Frederick Douglass' life is he started life as a slave. I don't know if there's any worse position you can start life as a one-day-old baby coming into this world. And to overcome those obstacles, never been to school a day in his life, never lived in a house with his mom and dad, seeing people sold and whipped, but yet there was a quest for knowledge inside of Frederick Douglass, which, as we know today, Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman are 2 of the most referenced names in American history. Not so much of the status of which they were born in, but how they used their life and how we look at their legacy to overcome oppression and prejudice and bigotry. So today, that's what we ask all of our corporations like the Gilchrist to do. And having a diversity and diversity and inclusion and equity committee shows that Gilchrist has seen there is things that we as a country, we must do better at. We must be more inclusive. We must prepare our students for greater opportunities so everybody can feel and experience what we know as the American dream. And so I think Douglas' story, along with Harriet Tubman, are 2 of the most inspirational stories, I think, in American history. We're now at 11 minutes, so I'm going to stop right there. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. What a powerful testimony. And, you don't get better than Frederick Douglass, right? Frederick Douglass, even after escaping slavery and coming into the abolition movement, as you know, had to contend with forces even there who, I think early on, they didn't want him to speak at rallies, and he was able to overcome even that adversity. Um, so you said that young people, you share that education is the way to set them free. Where do you get, you spoke about Frederick Douglass and his powerful resilience, right? Um, where do you think a young person can kind of draw on that resilience today?
Well, I believe that our young people must be directed to proper attitudes when they're entering the school building, the school classroom. And beyond that, I think students need to have that reinforced by going to libraries. Like the Enoch Pratt Library, the Enoch Pratt Free Library has an African American department in the main headquarters downtown. And on the entrance of that building is one of Frederick Douglass's most famous quotes. It reads, "Once a man learns to read, he shall be forever free." And I think talking to a student, they must realize, regardless of the obstacles they face, even in a city public education school system like Baltimore City, which is having so much turmoil dealing in the news right now, the student still must, on today, Monday, September 13th, he still must get up and go to school and put forth his best effort, even though he and his family for weeks have continually seen the news about the issues with our public school system. I tell my tour students, you must fight for your education. You must fight for your freedom. You must demand a quality education because that's what's going to make the difference. It's what made the difference in Frederick Douglass' life. Once he heard and learned a word called abolition, he wanted to know, well, what does this big word mean? He kept hearing people talk about it. So eventually, as he learned to understand the meaning of that word, then he used his educational quest along with that word, abolitionist, to become a free man. And I think that's how our children can become free by doing what I said to them. I use a little slogan because, the young people, you got to have very symbolic ways of saying things and metaphors. Yes. And I showed that. I told them, those who want to earn, you got to learn. The more you learn, the more you earn. And that had a resounding, they were saying that as a quote all throughout the tour.
I have I have to ask you this. I do I facilitate a grief group, a grief and trauma group for one of the local schools in Baltimore City. Can I use that phrase when I'm talking to and working with elementary school kids? If you want to earn, you got to learn.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. And I think what you talked about there, as we look at the at post 911, there was a lot of grief and a lot of stress. And America today has many places like a Gilchrist or different health places where persons can go and seek comfort from the grief we experienced during 911. But yet, where would Frederick Douglass go? For particularly those first 18 years as a child, where would he go when he see his Aunt Hester stripped naked and beat bloody? Where does he go when he sees the overseer put the heel of his boot on Frederick Douglass's brother until the blood runs from his eyes and nose? Where does a young Frederick Douglass go to get relief from that grief and that trauma?
Yeah. And as you phrase it like that, as a clinician, as a counselor, that's of course trauma, right? So when a young person goes through trauma, we try to support them. But in Frederick Douglass's case, there was no, there is no counselor he could go to. It was, his own resilience and some, people in his life. But yes, that's a powerful analogy.
And when we look at this being 9/11 2021, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in 1865, right? So that's over a century and a half ago, right? Where does the descendants of those enslaved persons whose blood runs through our DNA today, where is the place that we go to seek relief from that bloodline that says the horror, the destruction, the dehumanization of people, that's in Black folks' blood today. It doesn't go away. Where do you see a place where Black folks and even white folks can go find relief from that drama of not having a birthday? Just think about that. all of you on the Zoom call today, think about your birthday. Think about what it means to you and your family, your parents, your grandparents, your siblings, your other extended family when your birthday comes around. Think about Frederick Douglass and other enslaved persons never having a birthday celebration. What we take for granted, like my birthday, I just have a very exciting day because it's my birthday. But think about Frederick Douglass in the first 18 years of his life, not even knowing the date of his birth, much less having anyone give him a slice of birthday cake or a gift. That's the drama and the trauma that still remains. So we have to look at Frederick Douglass' story to say it's one truly inspiring story, particularly when we read his words and listen to his words, because when you listen to the first person, then you get a real feel for what Frederick Douglass went through in his life and how he was surely a true example, a symbol of being an overcomer. He didn't let what had happened to him in those 13, 18 years, didn't make him bitter, didn't make him hate, didn't make him despise. All he hated was the system, but not the people. In fact, when he comes back to Baltimore after being exiled for 28 years, he speaks at Bethel AME Church that was down on Fells Point on Dallas Street. And he says to the attendees, I left Maryland because I hated slavery, but I love Eastern Shore, Maryland. I love my adopted hometown, Baltimore. In fact, Frederick Douglass, after freeing slavery in Maryland, ending slavery, he came back to Maryland numerous times, built houses. And today we have, as I mentioned, so many things named after Frederick Douglass across the world, across this country. It's unbelievable. Schools, statues, bridges. Over in Pennsylvania, our state to the north, they have 14 universities that has a Frederick Douglass Institute. 14. And so his story is truly inspirational because his life story, again, it's a story of somebody who started life with less than nothing. But look how his life ended. And so today, bringing the story of Frederick Douglass to light to your viewers is very important to me. And what I'm hopeful is that each of you, if you don't have a copy of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass in your home, make sure you get a copy of that book, and as a family, do some reading. Read a chapter every so often. Have your young people read it. And so people who are not quite acquainted with Frederick Douglass' life in detail, because we all know the name Frederick Douglass, but many people don't even know he was a Baltimorean for over 12 years. They don't know these things because, unfortunately, the lives of enslaved persons in detail just hasn't been looked at as it should be. But through their narratives, and you sharing their narratives, you can help other people understand that Mr. Douglass' life is a life of truly amazing story. We all are better for it, you know? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fields. Before we get ready to close, I wanted to ask and invite any of our listeners today if they have any questions or comments.
I think a lady is talking, but she hasn't unmuted herself. The lady there in the lower left-hand corner, she's speaking, but she needs to unmute herself.
Yes, if you is this Lindsay? Are you speaking?
No, it's someone on an iPhone. 443-845-0341.
Okay. Me.
Well, let me pose this question. Oh, there's a lady. Miss Barbara has her hand up.
Yes.
Hi. I want to thank you for this.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
No.
yes, we can hear you. Hello? Did we lose your signal? Uh-oh, yeah, you're muted again. Let me try to, maybe I can unmute you. No, it says that you're not muted. Could you, I can't hear you. I'm so sorry. I think, Barbara, you were going to ask a question.
Well, I was going to make a comment. You actually already answered my question. I'm part of a book club, and I'm excited. I wrote down the name of the book, and would this be the one if we were going to have a personal introduction to Frederick Douglass? Would this be the choice that you would make?
Yes, the narrative, I believe, is the first step towards reading and learning about Frederick Douglass because it's his words.
Right.
There are many different authors who have thousands of books on Frederick Douglass. But for me, as a researcher, you want to try to get first person source, the source from the first person, as opposed to second or third, if you can.
So true. Thank you.
Now, the book club. I do have a wonderful book for book clubs, and I have a chapter on Frederick Douglass, shameless plug. It's called Freedom Seekers, Early Abolitionists in Antebellum Baltimore by yours truly. And in fact, it's a book, it's a chapter book, and I do have Frederick Douglass in chapter 11.
Okay, thank you.
But also, for the ladies, one of the things I think, if you want to share Douglass's story, share it from the perspective of the women in his life. Share it from the perspective of Anna Murray Douglass, his first wife, Helen Pitts, his second wife, his young daughter, Rosetta Douglass Bragg, who was refused admission to Rochester Public Schools, but she writes about her mother. She's the first one who gives us a really good close-up look at Frederick Douglass's first wife, Anna. And think about the women like Julia Griffiths and others, the two women in England who really purchased his freedom papers. So when you look at Douglass, you can look at it from many different perspectives: the abolitionist, the great lecturer, the statesman, but also the husband, the father, the uncle, 21 grandchildren.
I think that's a great idea. They'd really enjoy. I think that personal perspective is so interesting. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to thank all of you for tuning in and being with us as Mr. Fields shared the story about the early life of Frederick Douglass, a true hero, not only in Maryland, but in this country. So thank you so much, and thank you for joining us for another Inspirations. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Janice. Thank you, Diane.
Thank
Hello,
you,
Miss
Mr.
Mary. How you doing over there? Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Beautifully done.
Thank
Very
you.
Thank you.
inspirational.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.